Hello and welcome to the Liberty Ginger podcast. I am your host, Mike Ursery, and this is episode number 3. The Liberty Ginger podcast is a part of the Think Liberty Network. You can find the Think Liberty Network at most places where podcasts are hosted, to include iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. Well, here we are once again at the end of another week, at the end of another news cycle, and the news, well, as we all know, at the end of last week was the tragic shooting that happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A man walked into the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, opened fire, killing 11 people. We're going to go over that. Our hearts are certainly with those affected by it, those who lost loved ones on that day. It's a tragedy. We don't understand why it happens. We will talk about that, and we will also talk about the aftermath. A lot of things happening in the news, a lot of things said by the president, a lot of things said about the president. Who's right, who's wrong? Should anyone really even be saying anything, especially when they're saying it almost immediately after the event happened? We're going to go over that in this episode. Other things that happened in the news this week. President Trump, I don't know how he did this, but he managed to do this. I don't know if he did this on purpose or if it just happened on accident. But Donald Trump has people talking about the Constitution, and I think that is absolutely amazing. We have people talking about the Constitution, we have people talking about amendments, and we have people talking about the ratification process, and yes, we have people talking about executive power, and I love it. I think that is great. It's a great discussion that I think we should be having in this country. Hopefully we can keep this discussion going and we can talk more about this. Other reasons why Donald Trump is in the news: he is sending troops to the border, which whenever it was first reported, it said that he was going to send 5,000 troops to the border, and they were going to only be there to assist the Department of Homeland Security, that primarily being the U.S. Border Patrol. The Border Patrol is at the border right now waiting for this migrant caravan that is said to arrive. Not sure what day. It's going to be sometime after midterms, but I don't know what day they're going to arrive, if they do even arrive at all. Well, that number has gone up from 5,000, and it's now being reported that it could be as many as 15,000 troops going to the border. We're going to get into all of that in this episode, but first, I would like to get something out of the way, some news that I think is pretty good news. Last Sunday, October 30th, the Boston Red Sox defeated the Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series, the Red Sox winning in 5 games. Now, I don't say that because I'm a Red Sox fan. I'm not. I'm a fan of the San Diego Padres, and I've been a Padre fan for over 3 decades. Growing up as a Padre fan, I grew up, and actually still have a very rather large dislike for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Not only am I a big Padres fan, but I'm also a huge baseball fan. I watch the World Series every year. The Padres are part of the National League, and usually when I watch the World Series, I will go for whichever National League team is there. So one year the St. Louis Cardinals played against the Red Sox. I went for St. Louis. One year the New York Mets, back in 2015, went against the Kansas City Royals. I went for the Mets. I usually go for the National League team. However, if it is a team from the NL West, I will go for the American League. Well, let me say, if it's a team from the NL West not named the Padres, I will go for the American League. So this year I went for the Red Sox. Last year, the Dodgers were in the World Series, lost to Houston in 7 games. I went for Houston. The San Francisco Giants made the World Series 3 times in 5 years. People might remember that. Between 2010 and 2014, they went 3 times, and in those 3 times, I went for the Texas Rangers, the Detroit Tigers, and the Kansas City Royals. One thing I have not gotten to experience is watching the Padres win a World Series. They've been twice, but they haven't ever won. Will I ever get to experience that? Maybe. I mean, never say never. One day it may happen, but it hasn't happened yet. However, I do think it was very nice to watch the Dodgers lose in the World Series 2 years in a row. That gives me great satisfaction. Now, if you are a Red Sox fan, of course, this is ecstatic news for you. If you're someone like me who dislikes the Dodgers, then this is good news for you. And if you are a Dodger fan, well, too bad. So I wanted to get that out of the way first. That obviously was news that happened over the week. So, of course, I feel it was necessary to go over that. Last Saturday, a man named Robert Bowers, 47 years old, walked into the Tree of Life Synagogue with an AR-15, opened fire, and 11 people lost their lives. Along with that, 4 law enforcement officers were wounded. The man was arrested, and now he is facing 44 counts of federal charges, including 11 hate crime charges, that being the 11 counts of murder that he's facing. It was reported that the man who did this, I said his name once, and I'm not going to say his name again. He doesn't get that recognition from me. I'm just going to call him simply the man from here on out. The man was a white supremacist, as it was reported, and he had a hatred for Jewish people. It was reported that the whole thing lasted for as long as 20 minutes. And according to CNN, this is an article from CNN that was posted on October 28th. And in it, you start to really learn about this man. And one of the things from CNN is that in the report it says he allegedly made anti-Semitic statements after his arrest. While in custody and receiving medical treatment, Bowers told a SWAT officer he wanted all Jews to die and also that they, the Jews, were committing genocide to his people, according to the police criminal complaint. The bloodshed took place on the same day as Saturday's Shabbat services. At the time of the shooting, 3 different congregations were holding services at the Tree of Life. I am not aware of any incidents where Jews are committing genocide against the white race. If there are any incidents out there, please let me know. But I am not aware of anything like that. I'm aware of something that happened as far back as the 1930s, where the Germans tried to commit genocide against the Jewish race. But I'm not aware of any reverse scenarios of Jews trying to commit genocide and eradicate this planet of the white race. Another thing that was reported by CNN is that he was not known to law enforcement. According to Bob Jones, the FBI Pittsburgh special agent in charge, he told CNN, "At this point, we have no knowledge that Bowers was known to law enforcement before today." CNN also reports that he has an active license to carry firearms. And then he also, this is interesting as well, people I'm sure are aware of the migrant caravan. Well, I actually said it earlier in this episode, of the migrant caravan making its way towards the United States. And this man, he blamed the Jews for helping migrant caravans. On his Gab.com account, Bowers claimed Jews were helping transport members of the migrant caravans. He shared a video that another Gab.com user posted, purportedly of a Jewish refugee advocacy group, HIAS, on the U.S.-Mexico border. HIAS, if you are not aware, it stands for Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. And what this is it's an American nonprofit, and what they do is they provide humanitarian aid and assistance to refugees. It started back in 1881 when they were providing assistance to Jewish refugees who came over to the United States, and further on they began assisting refugees of other ethnic groups. So this man, I'm not aware of any proof of this. I don't know if there's any evidence out there to support his claim, but he thinks that Jews are helping migrants who are making their way to the United States. He thinks the Jews are helping them to cross the border. It's been reported before that these migrants, they want to cross the border into the United States, and then they want to claim asylum. But it appears that this guy took it upon himself because he's worried about a migrant caravan approaching the border. He's worried that Jews who are not committing genocide against white people, he thinks are committing genocide against white people. He took it upon himself to walk into a synagogue with a rifle and open fire and murder people. As I said before, he's facing 44 federal charges, including 11 counts of hate crime. Later in the week, he submitted his plea. He appeared in court, submitted his plea. He pled not guilty. He was arrested while in the act of shooting people, and now he goes and he pleads not guilty. This, according to the New York Times. Mr. Bowers leaned forward in his seat, firmly nodding his close-shaved head and answering yes loudly and without hesitation to every question he was asked. Those questions included whether he was informed of and understood the charges and penalties. The possible penalties, he was informed by Troy Rivetti, one of the prosecutors, are first a sentence of death. Mr. Bowers did not appear to flinch. Beyond death were a variety of prison sentences from 10 years to life connected to the 44 counts. At the end of the short hearing, Mr. Bowers was asked how he pleaded. As is typical at this stage of the proceedings, said his lawyer, Michael Navarra, a federal public defender, I asked the court to enter a plea of not guilty. He also requested a jury trial, which prosecutors estimated could take 3 to 4 weeks or longer if Attorney General Jeff Sessions certified it to be a capital case. So he's requested a jury trial. I think we all know how this trial is going to end. I don't even know if it's even going to take that long to be done with this trial. This was a horrific event, and it doesn't make matters any better that in the days following this event, you have people fighting, just like always. There are people in the center of this who lost loved ones. And here we are talking about who to blame. Some people are blaming Donald Trump because of what they say is the rhetoric that he uses, the things that he says at his campaign rallies. One thing that was said by a person named Cecilia Wang, who is a deputy director with the ACLU, in a statement, she said, the numerous statements he's made calling himself a nationalist, crowds at his rallies chanting threats against George Soros, it's all connected. That was reported by the Washington Post. Okay, well, yes, George Soros is Jewish. There are people who do not like George Soros, and it's for reasons not related to him being a Jew. Now, you might remember me saying in the last episode that people look at George Soros as this Democrat supervillain. I said in the episode that he's viewed as this dark overlord who stays in the shadows, but he is said to fund several progressive initiatives. So yes, there are people who dislike George Soros, but it's not because he's Jewish. But that was a statement that this person made. And here's another example of blaming President Trump. An American journalist named Julia Ioffe, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Julia Ioffe is a person who covers national security and foreign policy for The Atlantic and also for GQ. And she's also had her work appear previously in the Columbia Journalism Review, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, various other outlets. There was one thing that she tweeted. And she tweeted this on October 27th. She said, in a word to my fellow American Jews, the president makes this possible. Here, where you live. I hope the embassy move over there where you don't live was worth it. And she also said that Gentiles should not comment on the situation. So she's blaming American, at least this is how I perceive it. She's blaming American Jews who support Donald Trump because he moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and that is why this happened. I'm really not seeing a connection there, because apparently this was about genocide against white people, and this is also about refugees and about migrant caravans. At least that's what it seems to be about. I don't really see how you connect moving an embassy to Jerusalem to this, but she still tweeted that out. And it got worse as the week went along. CNN's Don Lemon, he was speaking with Chris Cuomo, and he said during the show, he was talking about how he said that white males are the biggest terrorist threat to this country. What he said was, we keep thinking that the biggest terror threat is something else. Some people who are marching toward the border like it's imminent. And I mean, he's talking about the migrant caravan, of course. Everyone's talking about this migrant caravan in the days leading up to midterms. And he said, we have to stop demonizing people and realize that the biggest terror threat is white men. Now, at first he said we have to stop demonizing people. Yes, Mr. Lemon, we absolutely do have to stop demonizing people. But for him to start out saying we have to stop demonizing people, and then say and realize that the biggest terror threat is white men, most of them radicalized to the right, and we have to start doing something about them. So he says that we have to stop demonizing people, and then he goes on to demonize people. And it wasn't just news media that was making comments. It was also late night talk shows. One of even Colbert, the host of The Late Show. Colbert is certainly known to be an outspoken critic of Donald Trump. Colbert made comments on The Late Show that was on Monday, October 29th. And he starts out with his monologue. The monologue started out with very good words from Colbert. He says, it was the worst act of violence against Jewish people in U.S. history. It's tragic, it's sickening, and our thoughts are with the victims, their families, and the larger Jewish community. But more than that, I want to say hate is not what America stands for, and tonight, all of us are with you. Those are words to say in a time like this. But then he continues on his monologue, and he goes after Trump. Specifically, he's going after Trump's response to the attack. Donald Trump condemned the attack, and he also condemned anti-Semitism. But this is what Colbert had to say. Naturally, in times like these, our nation looks to its president for comfort and guidance. That's our first mistake. Immediately after the shooting, Trump told reporters how the attack in Pittsburgh could have been prevented. Spoiler alert, it's more guns. Colbert said before mocking Trump's suggestion that an armed guard could have stopped the shooting. And yes, Trump did say that. Yes, it's so simple. In fact, why didn't the Jewish people have an armed guard for the last 5,000 years? Okay, so yeah. Immediately after the shooting, Donald Trump said that the synagogue should have had security. Well, there are synagogues around the country that do have security. It's not required, but there are some that do. There are churches that do. There are other religious institutions that do the same thing. Now, that certainly isn't something that you want to hear immediately after something like this happens. Trump, I don't know, maybe he thought he was just giving his own suggestion as to how this could have been prevented. But that was what he said. Now, this shooting happened on Saturday. Colbert's comments come on Monday. So Colbert chose to go after that one thing that Trump said. That's what Colbert chose to go after. Now, something that was reported about this man in the news is that, yes, he is anti-Semitic. But another thing that was reported is that he is also anti-Trump. And according to Israel Nation News, they reported that on his account on the Gab social media outlet, this man, who according to Pennsylvania state voting records was a registered independent, claimed that a Jewish conspiracy controlled the U.S. government and was dedicated to controlling whites. In an image reposted to his account, President Trump is shown taking orders from an Orthodox Jewish man. So this guy essentially is thinking that the Jews are committing genocide against white people, and they are controlling the U.S. government, and Donald Trump being the president right now, Donald Trump is their puppet. This is what this guy thinks. There's no evidence of that, but this is what he thinks. Donald Trump took to his Twitter account, because that is what Donald Trump does, and he took to his Twitter account to respond to all these things that were being said about him and about the right. One thing that he tweeted on Monday, October 29th, he said, "The fake news is doing everything in their power to blame Republicans, conservatives, and me for the division and hatred that has been going on for so long in our country. Actually, it is their fake and dishonest reporting which is causing problems far greater than they understand." Okay. Well, one thing that's really been talked about over the past week is not just Donald Trump's rhetoric about things like immigration and nationalism, but also the things that he says about the media. Now, he has said before, and one thing where he really went wrong was calling the media the enemy of the people. Well, he continues on Tuesday, October 30th. He says, CNN and others in the fake news business keep purposely and inaccurately reporting that I said the media is the enemy of the people. Wrong. I said that the fake news media is the enemy of the people. A very big difference. When you give out false information, not good. Okay, so he tries to explain himself there, and he continues on. Check out tweets from the last 2 days. I refer to fake news media when mentioning enemy of the people, but dishonest reporters use only the word media. The people of our great country are angry and disillusioned at receiving so much fake news. They get it and fully understand. So Donald Trump says that he's not talking about all media in general as enemy of the people, but he is talking about what he considers to be the fake news media. Well, who is the fake news media? Is it, well, certainly it must be CNN, because Trump is always at odds with CNN. Would it also be outlets like MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times even? Well, what about Fox News? Is Fox News a part of that dishonest media, or is Fox News that somehow truth-telling media? Because I can tell you right now, there have been just as many lies and just as many incidents of false reporting in Fox News as there has been with any other outlet. But going deeper into this, it is not, I don't think it's very wise for Donald Trump to use those words, enemy of the people. If you look back at history, there have been some incidents in history where governments have labeled certain groups as enemies of the people. It happened in Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, he said that the Jews were the enemy of German people. It happened also during the French Revolution. The French government labeled revolutionaries as enemies of the people. They executed these revolutionaries by guillotine, and they justified it by calling these revolutionaries enemies of the people. And it also happened in Soviet Russia when dictators like Vladimir Lenin and also Joseph Stalin had referred to wealthy landowners as enemies of the people. Back in those times in Soviet Russia, you had different classes of people. The kulaks were the wealthy landowners that Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin were talking about. Stalin wanted to liquidate that class. You also had other classes like the Butraics, who were completely landless. You had the Bedaiks, who were considered poor peasants, and then you had the Serendiaks, who were described as middle-income peasants. These people were labeled as enemies of the people by the communist government that ruled the Soviet Union. They were arrested, sent off to gulags, and many were also executed. I'm not going to go too much into the history of Soviet Russia or socialism. I'm just pointing out examples of how enemies of the people have been used in the past. Now, I'm not saying that to say that Donald Trump is going to round up members of what he considers fake news media and send them off to gulags or execute them. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that for someone who is the president of the United States, he should be very cautious about the words that he uses, especially when he's talking about other Americans, even if they are in the media, even if they are reporting about him dishonestly. Be very cautious about how you are using that phrase, enemy of the people. If you want to talk about the media being dishonest, okay, that's fine, but try to tone that down just a little bit. We don't need to be using that phrase, enemy of the people. Donald Trump, of course, was in the news later on throughout the week. Now, this is one thing that he said, and when I said that he's got people talking about the Constitution, Donald Trump did an interview with Axios on HBO, and in that interview, he said that he plans to sign an executive order to remove the right to citizenship for babies of non-citizens and unauthorized immigrants born on U.S. soil. Now, what he's talking about is he's talking about using an executive order to undo language in the 14th Amendment. Okay. First of all, I don't think Donald Trump is going to do that personally. Midterms are coming up, and it's very possible that the Democrats are going to take back the House. If Donald Trump attempts a breach of power by using executive order to make a unilateral change to the Constitution of the United States, he is giving the Democrats a reason to impeach him. If they were to take the majority in the House, they can draw up articles of impeachment, and he is basically handing them a reason to do that if he actually tries to attempt this. President Trump said during the interview, "How ridiculous. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and it has to end." The 14th Amendment. What the 14th Amendment says is all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. The Supreme Court has upheld this rule for legal permanent residents, but has never decided a citizenship case involving an illegal immigrant or a short-term visitor to the U.S. That second part reported by CBS News. Now, a sitting president cannot just sign an executive order and make a change to the Constitution like that. I can tell you that right now. The president says that he has spoken with White House counsel and with people who told him that, yes, there is a way for him to do that. I highly question that White House counsel. Making an amendment to the Constitution is not easy. If you want to amend the Constitution, the process for it, you have to have at least a 2/3 majority approve it in both the House and the Senate. And not only that, but it also has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. So 50 states divided by 4, that's 12.5. 12.5 times 3 is 37.5, rounded up to 38. So 3/4 of the states, you need at least 38 states to agree to ratify an amendment to the Constitution. You can't get 38 states in this country to agree on anything, first of all, especially if it pertains to something like immigration and citizenship. 38 states are not going to agree on that either. Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, who since the Brett Kavanaugh hearing has been called Lindsey Graham 2.0, Lindsey Graham told CBS News later on that he planned that he would introduce legislation similar to any executive order President Trump might issue ending birthright citizenship in the United States. It's unclear whether Graham means he would initiate the process for a constitutional amendment. In 2010, Graham considered introducing a constitutional amendment to change existing law to end birthright citizenship. And what this really pertains to is the whole discussion about anchor babies, people who are in the country but are not citizens of the country. They give birth to a child. The child is a natural-born citizen of the United States. And then whenever you go to deport the family, well, you can't deport the child because the child is a citizen. And why would you deport a family but leave the child behind? The 14th Amendment was ratified on July 28, 1868, and I really don't know about everything that led up to that amendment, and I'm really not going to get into a history lesson here. But if they were to make a change to that amendment, it's definitely not going to be by the president signing an executive order. If you want to make a change to the Constitution like that, then you really do need to go through the entire constitutional process of ratifying amendments. And then President Trump spoke with reporters on Wednesday, October 31st. This is from the Washington Post. President Trump said Wednesday that he would deploy as many as 15,000 military personnel to the border with Mexico in response to caravans of Central American migrants making their way northward, doubling the figure Pentagon officials have announced would be operating there. We'll go up to anywhere between 10 and 15,000 military personnel on top of border control, ICE, and everybody else at the border, Trump said in remarks to reporters before departing Washington for a campaign rally in Florida. Nobody's coming in. We're not allowing people to come in. Now, this was first reported the week prior that he was going to send troops to the border to assist with the Department of Homeland Security. And it was reported that it was only going to be 5,000 troops. But now it's grown to 15,000. And on top of that, the Washington Post reports that 2,092 members of the National Guard already are there. And it's not clear if those 2,092 National Guard members are going to be a part of that 15,000. The Washington Post also says that if the deployment reaches 15,000 troops, it would be roughly equivalent to the size of the U.S. military's presence in Afghanistan and 3 times the size of the presence in Iraq. Why do we still have people in Iraq? Already, the deployment is believed to be the largest of its kind in more than a century. The number of troops deployed will change each day as military forces flow into the operating area, but the initial estimate is that the Defense Department will have more than 7,000 troops supporting DHS across California, Arizona, and Texas, U.S. Northern Command said in a statement issued shortly after Trump spoke. Now, people are saying that this is a political stunt because midterms are approaching, and you have a migrant caravan who's making its way towards the southern U.S. border, and it's just a political stunt to get the right excited and get them to the polls and prevent the Democrats from taking over the House of Representatives and possibly even the Senate. But Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, and I love General Mattis, and I'm not saying that just because I'm a Marine. General Mattis is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful man, and I have no shame whatsoever saying that about him. General Mattis has said, according to the Washington Post, the support that we provide to the Secretary for Homeland Security is practical support based on the request from the Commissioner of Customs and Border Police, so we don't do stunts in this department. The Defense Secretary said the military had carried out similar missions within the United States following natural disasters. We are there in support of the Secretary of Homeland Security, who needs additional military assistance. So if and when this caravan does make it to the U.S. border, they're going to be confronted not just by the U.S. Border Patrol, not just by ICE, but also by the U.S. military. That'll be something really interesting to watch going forward. Midterms are almost over with. Midterms, November 6th. It is almost over. I know that the presidential cycle starts the following day, but I am so ready for this midterm election to pass. And in the following episode of the Liberty Ginger podcast, we will be talking about results from the midterm election. Thank you for listening to the Liberty Ginger podcast. Again, I am Mike Ursery. I would say that if you enjoy listening to this podcast, I would ask that you please hit the subscribe button. I would ask that you rate this podcast, leave a comment. As I've said before, when you do that, it makes the algorithms happy. So if you enjoy listening to this podcast, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Liberty Ginger podcast is a part of the Think Liberty Network. As I've said before, you can find the Think Liberty Network in most places where podcasts are hosted, to include iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening.